Hi, and welcome to the Eat, Move, Live 52 podcast. I'm excited to introduce my friend, farmer and author, Michael Bunker. When I first learned about Michael, it was on a podcast about writing. He writes a few things, both fiction and nonfiction. But when I first heard of him, it was Amish science fiction that caught my ear. It didn't really matter to me what Michael was writing, but how he was living. You see, Michael Bunker lives a pretty simple lifestyle. He and his family live off-grid. He doesn't have regular access to electricity, and he doesn't have always-on, always-connected internet. For most of us, this would make life almost impossible, but Michael actually used these limitations to his advantage. I followed Michael over the years, and I've learned a lot from him about the value of simplicity in one's life. I know you'll love his take on life, fermented foods, and even more. Michael, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
And I've been super excited because I keep hearing about you, and now I get to hear you. So it's so exciting.
Well, it's exciting to me too. I do a lot of podcasts, but usually it's about selling books, and so this is an exciting departure to actually talk about the bulk of my life.
We promise 0 marketing questions.
All right. I'm already in.
Awesome. Well, Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I guess you'd call us plain people. We live very simply. Almost an Amish-like, although we're not Amish, almost an Amish-like life. We live off-grid, and actually beyond off-grid in our the bulk of our life, which means our cottage and our farm is 18th century. It's pre-industrial. We don't use any power up there at all, and we do everything pretty much like our forefathers did. Not everything, and we can talk about that. But I'm also an author. I've written I don't know how many books. I've written quite a few books, both fiction and nonfiction, and constantly writing. And I also serve to talk to a lot of people all over the country and world about not just off-grid living, but independent type of living, simplicity. And so it's been an interesting, I think about 15 years now that we've been farming and living something of this kind of life. And so it's been an interesting 15 years.
Well, I had no idea it was that long.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Was it like flipping a switch, or was it like a sort of a gradual thing?
I love that flipping a switch idea, because that's really how it got started. But we actually moved to an on-grid farm in 1997, so that was almost 20 years, or maybe more than 20 years ago. However, I'm not bad at math, but we had a small 5-acre farm, and it really did start with us with flipping off a switch, because we, as we would do things around the farm and water the chickens and all that, we would just ask ourselves a simple question: how would we do this if we didn't have access to this modern way of doing it? And when we were doing this, when we were starting, there was nothing on the internet. There was no homesteading pages, homesteading blogs. There was no foodie blogs. There was nothing. And we had Carla Emery's Encyclopedia of Country Living was the only book we had. And we would ask her, and sometimes she would actually have in the book, this is the way they used to do this. This is the way they would store eggs and all those things. So we actually started doing some of those things, and then one day we decided just to turn off the power for a few days and to see how we did, and to kind of give us a view of what it would be like. And it was eye-opening and earth-shattering, how really dependent we were kind of to this umbilical cord of the world. And so that's kind of how we got started.
Wow.
Literally flipping a switch, the breaker switch.
We turned off the power, and even simple things like making coffee, which, you made camp coffee before when you're camping, but if you had to do it and you hadn't thought about it beforehand, in other words, most people are living their lives and they've got their Keurig, and all of a sudden, it's not only the power's out, but it's staying out for a while. Those little things cause you to it's not panic, but you get into a mode where you're not able to think of a lot of things. You can only think of really one thing at a time, and it becomes very overwhelming, and you don't perform really well in those situations.
But
so it's Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I imagine that it's almost like a time machine, but in a way you choose to go in it, and so it has this like, wow, I chose this thing, and now I'm overwhelmed, but I'll figure it out.
Right, and you don't really have the feeling that there's an enemy coming over the hill, or that there's going to be riots or anything like that. So you're not as possibly panicked as you would be in a real situation. But at the same time, it does give you a very honest impression of how little you really have control over what happens to you, and even on a short term.
Yeah. Wow, that is amazing. I have some idea of what it feels like for different reasons, and I can talk to you about that later. But how amazing that you chose that, and then you moved from that 5-acre farm to a really off-the-grid farm?
Yeah, we moved in 2005. We left West Texas and moved out here to Central Texas, which was really kind of a harsher environment in a lot of ways, but we did have more water. We get more rainfall here. And so we expanded our acreage. We have about 25 acres here. And we decided from the very beginning we weren't even running power in from the county. So we didn't want anything to do with any of the grid utilities. We didn't mind having some power available to power cell phones, smartphone, whatever. And so we had still have the same small little solar panel system that gives us a minimal amount of power when we need it. But most of the time we're not hooked up at all.
So you're still not pressing the on button on the Keurig to get your coffee?
No, not unless I really, really, really want one. I mean, if I really, really want one, I could hook one up. The permutations I would have to go through to unplug everything and try to get enough power directed in. It's funny because, just to get on the air with you right now, the sun's really not up enough to put a real good charge on our solar batteries. We have a pretty old solar battery bank. And so about 9 or 10 o'clock, there's really not enough power to run everything I need to run to do this. So I've actually got the car. So I was hurrying to get down here, and put the car up to the battery bank and all this kind of stuff. And so that's the stuff people don't see. If I have to do something, there are some hoops I have to jump through.
Wow. Well, it really kind of makes you aware of like how you sort of have to plan your life, and I'm sure that you've gotten sort of into a rhythm. It's just when something like this, that's like unexpected, comes up, you sort of have to scramble. It's what is that resiliency, right? You've probably developed some resiliency over the years,
right? And there's really a lack of fear or any type of consternation. If we have a cloudy period, sometimes we've gone 7, 8, 10 days, almost a month before with almost no power at all, and to us, it's just life. I mean, it's not. I may not be able to have a meeting with my literary agent. I may not be able to have a meeting with somebody or maybe I just have to charge my cell phone in the car, and we do have a car, and so for now, we may be moving away from that too. But so it doesn't throw us off at all if we don't have that. If we don't have money, we have food. We don't get worried about a lot of things that really set people into a pattern of stress and worry.
Yeah, that's very That seems it's really powerful. And
it is really powerful.
I'm sure it's going to sink into us a little bit too, because like every time we learn something new, every time we have a podcast guest, sometimes we turn off at the end. We like to look at each other and we go, "Wow." It's like, there's so many things we haven't thought of, and we sort of feel them for days and weeks and forever after, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. So, so we kind of got it. So how this has like affected you positively, and it doesn't really sound like it's affected you negatively. But you still use modern technologies. Like right now, you're in I know you're like in a sort of a shed, right, or your barn or something.
Yeah, it's a little office that I've got. It's probably a couple football fields from where my cottage is. Okay. It's down by the creek, and I do have some power down here for a laptop and devices.
It's not enough of a creek where you could hook up like a water wheel for a generator?
It's a runoff creek. It really only runs when it rains.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it doesn't really, and then it runs scarily. In Texas, it can get real scary when it does rain. But yeah, we don't have enough power for that, and I don't want it. That's another thing is one of the first instincts people have is, well, why don't you get more solar panels or increase your ability? And that's negative to our desires. There's an inclination. Everything has an inclination or a leaning that inclines you in a certain direction, and so we're very deliberate about our use of technology, and we actually think about, okay, if we do this, if we added 3 panels, yes, I would be able to come down here and do this show, or maybe 6 or 8 more batteries, and we'd be able to have power through the night down here at the office, and I could come do this show without thinking about it or having to do any extra steps. But I would also feel like, oh, you know what I could do is I could get me a small little refrigerator, and then there's an inclination. It's almost like being on the center of a rooftop, and everything you do inclines you to something.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
so we recognize that about ourselves.
Yeah, if you get enough solar panels and enough batteries, and an extension cord, you can have that Keurig up in the main house.
Exactly. Yeah, and you don't think I haven't thought that.
So you talk about guidelines for deciding what you're going to use and what you're not, and I've heard you before talk about sort of this process that you go through over time, where you introduce something and see how it treats you. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the term we use a lot is deliberate, and so what we do is we start off the first time that we do any task or any job or any project, we try to do it the hardest, old-fashionedest way. It's not always the hardest, but the way it would have been done before there were any of these devices, before the Industrial Revolution. So when we dug our root cellar, even though about 4 feet down we hit about a 6-inch solid slab of rock, we busted through it by hand. And we dug the whole thing by hand. We built the whole thing by hand, just like they would have built it in the 1800s. And because we wanted to know we could do it. And that if we had to do it in a jam or if something happened, this was a skill that we would know. In other words, this isn't a skill that's lost to the world anymore. Because we would have people come visit and, we would be digging a post hole and they would hit a rock and they'd say, it's impossible. You can't get through this. And we'd say, no, you can't. We've actually we built a 12 by 12 root cellar through a rock. And so, so the next time, like when we built our cistern, if we want to rent a backhoe, I don't have a problem with it because we don't have a problem with the technology. We have a problem with its tendency. And its tendency is to kind of rob all of us, the whole society, with knowledge and courage and those things that we need to be able to do things if we have, like the people that kind of scratched a life out here in the first place. And then when we do adopt a technology, then we test it. We see what is its tendency. If we, just having power down here at the office, if I find myself buying more and more devices to plug in to make my life more and more comfortable, and then the next step of that is, okay, well, I can't run this one thing, so I'll just get one more panel, and and then the next thing you know, we're right back in the prison we kind of escaped.
You're creating your own grid, and that sort of defeats the purpose.
Right, and I don't have any qualms whatsoever with people that live off grid that are completely have their own grid, as long as they understand that there's just X number of days that separates them from everybody else. In other words, they're not really self-sufficient and self-reliant, and maybe they don't want to, and that's perfectly fine with me. But I don't want them to be deceived into thinking that because they have solar panels that somehow they've got a little protective bubble from the realities of the natural world, because you really don't. And what our main interest in is maintaining these skills and the knowledge as a seed bed for further generations, and also for the benefit it gives us day to day in our health and our mindset and our freedom and all of those things. So, and it is a window people can look in and say, okay, maybe I don't want to do that whole thing. That sounds kind of crazy. I don't want to be in Central Texas and not have air conditioning in the middle of the summer. But I may want to try this project and learn from it. And that's the other thing we're trying to offer.
That is amazing. I can really relate, like somewhere deep in my heart, with that, creating a seed bank of skills.
Yeah.
Because right. I feel, so Roland and I went up in northern Washington a couple of years ago and took a primitive fire class. And in about 3 hours of trying, we had not started a fire, and it was really sad. It was like, okay, I know one person in the world, my dad, who can probably survive something close to like a food apocalypse. But right. I don't know that him and I can do that. And there's a sense of like homelessness and unbelonging to something that should be yours. It's like a squirrel.
That's exactly right.
It's like a squirrel that can't find its nuts, not its own nuts,
right.
but like
right.
It's like, holy cow, like this, it's something that should be yours that is not. And in order to get some semblance of it, you have to succumb to the pool of whatever it is that what is now available as what we know as environment gives you. Whether right. it's the addiction to technology or to whatever it is that we succumb to, because that's the void it's filling.
Right.
And it's like, wow, that is spooky that we're in that. And how can we gently step out of it without...
there's a disconnect in our lives with the actual natural world. We, like you said, we've come to believe this technicist world is natural. And it really isn't, but there's a disconnect even with our own ancestry, so our own genealogy, where there's a disconnect where my grandmother was born around the turn of the 20th century, and when she was born, there weren't airplanes, cars. There was, I think they had radio. There was electricity, but nobody had it. I mean, yeah. She lived in the country in Arkansas. Nobody had it, and so within about 20 years of her life, people were flying in planes, people were driving in cars. There was technology, there electricity, and everything changed pretty dramatically. There was a book that I read called Henry and the Great Society. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's a story. It's a fictional story of this man named Henry who lived just like my grandmother did, and they lived on a farm, and he had his family, and they rode their horse to the store to sell their eggs, and it goes through pretty in depth into his life. And then in this very short period of time, it starts off with they come and tell him, hey, we want to pave the road, and that's how it starts. Pave the road in front of his house. Well, as soon as they pave the road, then the cars start coming down, and it's not safe for him to ride the horses anymore. So he gets a car. Well, they come and pave his driveway. So now the sales trucks come in and they sell him a washing machine, a dryer, electricity, power into the barn. And it's basically this one man's life and how really, really, he's just a representative of us as people, of how we became a whole different species, really. Mm-hmm. You know, we became a different, and I'm not condemning that, other than to say we ought to at least have a grasp or a hold on what we were, the species that we were.
I feel like if you're awake to it, like if you bring a sugar glider from Australia as a pet, you have to be aware of where it comes from.
Right.
Because you can't just like put it in your backyard with the hummingbirds. And so there's some sort of knowledge of knowing who you are biologically that allows you to care for what you can under the modern circumstances. And I feel like so much of what people come to us with are all these, our teacher Katie calls it diseases of captivity, like all these overweight or having metabolic issues or anxiety or panic attacks or circadian rhythm disruptions, and they're all or most of them are paying tax on the environment that we are unconsciously inhabiting, thinking it's normal.
That's right.
And what I'm hearing you say is that you've stepped back into what is more natural human habitat, and I'm really excited to learn about what that's done for you.
The biggest thing that I can say that it's done for us and for our children and for the other people who have learned is a mental state of calm and clarity, so that we're not like this future being that's ripped out of its 24-hour womb and then just cast ashore into the jungle. We actually are able to have a calm view. So when you deliberate, and we try to live deliberately, you want to have a real understanding and not an artificial understanding. So the thing that I hear the most from people when they watch my YouTube videos or they interact with us is they say, I think that is great, but I couldn't do that. I can't live without air conditioning. Well, somehow you are descended until 70 years ago from people who were able to do that. Until about 70 or 80 years ago, most of the world did not have readily available air conditioning. So I don't think that that's true, that you couldn't do it. I think there's a mental issue here, and that mental issue is, I believe, at the root of the cause of a lot of diseases, a lot of health problems. I think it is a huge factor in people not doing things that are very simple to do that would be very helpful for their health and their life. And so, we hear people say, I couldn't do that. I couldn't, and you name the task. I couldn't do that. I like my fill in the blank too much. Mm-hmm. And so what we're really, and I don't mean this to be in a pejorative way, what we're really dealing with is a mental disease. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's a mental illness. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and he that's what he told me. He said, I just wouldn't be able to do that. And I said, you know what? You're a lot stronger than you think you are. And it's really just the facts that you're considering that have convinced you that you can't. Mm-hmm. You have false facts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I have a sense, just because of how I grew up in Eastern Europe, and I've only been here 7 years, I have a sense of that other world, the no air conditioning, no electrical something, or hand-powered, like a hand-powered egg mixer, that I'm really good at that. All these things that we grew up with, like my parents have a root cellar, so I know what that is. It's a sense of being connected to something that, of course, you can do it. And that's why I keep planting things that die on me here in Southern California, trying to figure out something's going to grow. Like, I'm not going to stop putting stuff in the ground, because eventually, parsley's doing great. Awesome.
Or lettuce must be good, because things keep eating them.
I know.
Yeah.
Darn things keep, eating it without any trace. So I'm like, what did I plant here? Because I'm sure there was something here 3 days ago, and now it's completely gone. But it's really the sense of yes, I can. I just have to create the environment that I can do it. But if I'm going to be watching cat videos on YouTube, the lettuce isn't going to be growing in the ground. So
that's right.
There's a dedication to belonging that at some point you have to make in some way.
There's so many levels to it too. The number one antidepressant in the world is the soil. And a lot of people don't realize that's actually scientifically true. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just there is something revelatory about actually growing something and then having it as a product that you eat or consume. And then you go a step further than that is when you're able to combine ingredients that you made all of it. And then a step further than that is when you're able to create maybe a whole meal, 100% from stuff that you grew and or made, and it keeps going from that. But if you back to where we started, which is just having your hand in the soil, whether something grows or not is really immaterial. We have a saying around here that's really not up to us, and it never has been up to humans to be guaranteed a product. The duty of it to us is ours. So the obedience is ours, and so. And we know that. So, we plant in hope every year. We put our hands in the ground and we do. And if we end up with that's one of the reasons why, some years we'll just have a bumper crop out here and we'll put up a ton of food. And maybe the next year we don't have anything, but we still plant and we still go through that, because that's the health part of it. That's the part that I think that our body needs, is that connection with the soil that alleviates so many of the stresses and tensions and despair of the modern age.
It's very interesting because so many of our students will take soil-based organisms in a pill. It's like a probiotic that's been extracted from the soil because scientists know that soil is good for us. But, and then they'll go separately to the gym and squat. And then they go separately to a tanning bed or take vitamin D. And then they'll go separately to expose themselves to blue light, which is now like 4 hours of your day to get all these things you can get by just squatting in your yard and poking at some ground. And it's amazing that all of that is commercialized. So there's like 4 or 5 channels of profit going into that person who can just go out and be home. And it's the weirdest thing. It's like a matrix.
Well, yeah, it's what they, a metaphor for that is what they did with wheat, with actual flour. When you originally, and what I mean by a kernel, not wheat, the product, but a kernel of grain, and all of the good things that were in that were ground up into flour originally. As things progressed, they took out anything that had any vitamins, minerals, or value, and they stripped that down to pure white cake flour, and that's what the rich people got. Rich people got that. The bran and everything else that was in there went to the poor people, which is actually where all the valuable stuff was. But then they started enriching it, so they actually sold it back to you. They stole it. And that's just kind of a metaphor for life, because that's what they're doing. They're selling all of the stuff that's free back to you. So, you can go to the gym and pay that fee, and you can go... what is the first thing if you talk to somebody, you go, what are you going to do for your vacation? Well, we're going to go camping. Well, camping is just visiting the outdoors. Yeah. It's visiting something that used to be your life. And so, and unhappily, so many people try to take the world with them when they go. So they, a $75,000, $80,000 camper and all that kind of stuff. But it really occurred to me. All of these things were little revelations to me as we went down this road. We would when we very first moved out here, we had no real water source, and it was very rough. We were living in a tent, and we would drive to the nearest state park, and we could fill up water containers and that sort of thing. And I would watch the people in their $80,000 campers, all parked, within 8 feet of each other, just like they are in the city, and with these artificial life support systems of the water and the cable and the electricity hooked up to that, and they left home to come do this. With the only benefit is there might be some view of nature. Yeah. And so that tells you what we're willing to pay to have a view of what is ours for free. As a birthright.
Yeah. Wow.
We come to it, and I don't think we would have come to it if our own health hadn't led us to, what we do for a living, helping people reclaim what health they can in an urban environment. But I feel like unless we start paying tax in some way, mentally, emotionally, physically, we won't wake up to this. I don't know that there's enough canary in the mine signals that we can perceive until it's our own.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think health-wise, that's the big major. I think it's the major linchpin for a lot of people, is they kind of go in one of two directions when they start to even anticipate the health problems that are ubiquitous with everybody now. They get the same conditions. Is they kind of do wake up to it and try to start thinking about other ways of dealing with it, or they go down that well-worn path of the pharmaceutical business and everything else that has sprung up to monetize our bad decisions.
Yeah. Well, this kind of reminds me, we have a chapter in our latest book. It's about gardening, right? So on the surface, it's just about gardening. But the reality is it's about doing all those things that you talked about. It's getting outside. It's like stacking all of these little things. Like just the fact that you're gardening, you might think it's totally insignificant to produce like a head of lettuce after a lot of work. But you've produced a head of lettuce that you've been outside, you've squatted, you've knelt down on the ground, you've got your hands dirty, and now you're eating something that you've grown, and that's like a powerful thing. And people just really don't, and I hope it came across in that chapter that was the purpose. But like a lot of the things that we write about, it's all of these little things add up to a better, healthier lifestyle. So much more than getting on a program that takes you to the gym 5 times a week and eats a diet according to a meal plan, and gets on this regimented schedule. So, yeah.
Well, there's an idea that you can shortcut a lot of that stuff, and I think that's one of the things people, I think one of the most popular memes that I've seen that go around in the spring every year are these memes that say on Facebook and all that, and they say, gardening, a way to grow a tomato for $5, and so it is this real diminishing way of looking at. And the problem with that, of course, is they're not adding in their healthcare costs. They're not adding in depression. They're not adding in suicide. They're not adding in lost family members, grief, the destruction of our relationship with our children and our parents, our historical suicide. Those have costs that are not being included into this little comparison. Mm-hmm. But the main thing is that the people that do. The system will provide an out for people that do see that. And so what they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, just buy better tomatoes. Just go buy better food.
Yeah.
Buy it from Whole Foods instead of buying it from the grocery store. And they don't ever get back to the fact that the reality of the problem is I'm disconnected from the natural world, and I'm the one that's deprived. The soil is depleted, and I'm depleted, and I'm not just going to be able to pay to fix that.
Yeah,
it's not a dollar economy problem.
We need to reverse meme this thing and say, how a $5 tomato can save your life, or can save you thousands of dollars in and a straitjacket.
There's your next book right there.
There we go.
There you go, Roland. Yeah. Michael just gave you your next assignment.
I know.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about specifics. I think we got a pretty good handle on how overall this taking things a little bit simpler and being more what was your deliberate can kind of positively affect us. But when it comes to food, other than growing a $5 tomato, right? What are some of the simpler things that people can do that have a positive impact on health? What's the biggest bang for the food buck?
If you're not able to use animals wherever you live, you're not able to have chickens or whatever. I say in my book, Surviving Off Grid, I think that the biggest benefit to any homestead, or even if people can do it, is to have chickens, because it covers all of the gamut of everything. In fact, because hopefully at some point you'll decide you want to grow some of what the chickens eat, so that your eggs are not deficient, and have the minerals and things that they need. Because the eggs we get at the store are not just the chickens were cruelly raised, but the feed that the chickens got was deficient, minerally deficient. And so it has the form and the sense of an egg, but it really isn't an egg. And you can taste the difference. Mm-hmm. And so as far as training our mind, which is really what my whole program is about, having chickens and then trying to produce a historically correct egg, and that's really what down the line, as far as growing things in a garden, I think the most beneficial thing people can do is grow greens and herbs and perennials, things like rosemary and sage. But greens, not only are greens a way to learn about soil nutrition, and people don't realize when you go and get that beautiful head of lettuce at the store, that is artificially. There are artificial ways in which that is accomplished that don't involve a real nutritionally balanced and rich soil, because they just can't afford to produce it that way. And so growing greens is a small way for someone to start seeing how that can be done, and how you first you produce a minerally rich, healthy green that then can become animal food, and it becomes people food. It becomes an adjunct in other products, a sandwich, So maybe you do a small plot of grain, or maybe you do potatoes, and, you build up from that to a meal. Even in a small backyard. My sister lives in Houston, and she has a backyard garden. And it's fun for me living the way that I do and seeing her. She's a controller for a Finnish oil company. And so to see her
so that's the same.
excited about having provided an entire meal out of her backyard. There's something revelatory about that will change you, that changes people. And then go so far as to make your salad dressing, and then go so far as to provide a meat element if you eat meat, and then to grow from there. And I said there's different levels of revelation. So with me, it was, I made this egg sandwich with an egg that I grew, right? And then, I grew the greens that are on this egg sandwich. And then, I was able to make the mayonnaise or the mustard that was on. Then I made the bread. I actually grew the grain, grinded it, sifted it, and 100% of everything that I'm eating in this meal came right here from the land. And there's almost an unlocking of your spirit and your soul that revelation brings, that you are actually a free, an independent person who has kind of been co-opted into a system that you didn't ever really deliberately sign into. You were born into it. And it really does. It really does have an effect on your health, and it has an effect on everything else.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice to go to, like, when I go to visit Bulgaria and go to Galina's parents' house, and they've got a huge greenhouse that they made themselves out of an old bus, like the windows from an old bus. I know, it's really cool.
Yeah, because it opens, right? You can air it. You can air it. Yeah, it's very cool.
It's beautiful.
And they grow, I think they grow all of their vegetables, all of their produce, unless like we're driving somewhere and her father sees something out of the corner of his eye at a stand and goes, "Oh, we're stopping for that biggest squash I've ever seen," right?
Yeah.
And like he'll go and he'll haggle and he'll trade some of the stuff that he grew for some of the stuff that they have, and it's just like it's really fun.
That's a freeing economy right there. We call the system that we have to interact with sometimes the dollar economy. And the dollar economy basically causes you to reduce the real value of anything you own to kind of a standard so that it can be exchanged for somebody else's freedom. And what we try to do as much as possible is, it's the same question we ask all the time. So even if we're making a loaf of bread, and we go, okay, in this case we made the wheat, we made the butter, we made whatever it is that we added to it. And then we're putting in yeast, and then the question will go is, okay, how would I do this? If there was a systemic collapse of the society, and we're months into this, and need to feed a lot of people or need to feed ourselves, how would they have done yeast? And then you study about it and you find out yeast is everywhere.
Yeah, it's like
you can't stop it.
Yeah, it's like your lawn if it rains. It's like it just keeps coming. And but we don't know that, as a people, it's mind blowing for them to know that you could just, and we've also been told that everything that happens naturally to food is bad.
Uh-huh.
If it should be sterilized from the beginning, and anything that happens to it, and if it is sterilized at the beginning, anything that happens to it is bad. But people are always like, oh, this milk went bad. Well, it only went bad because they killed it first. If it had never been killed in the first place, it doesn't go bad. It turns into something else good.
Yeah.
In fact, your ancestors used to take that gallon of milk and sit it on the counter and let it clabber because it was better for them.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And they liked it. They liked the taste of it better. And you read books. If you read books of the 18th century, clabbered milk was the thing. Nobody wanted to drink it right out of the cow. So they, but we're taught from being children that's bad, and the only reason we're taught that is because they killed it first. That's why you have to have a refrigerator. One time, and this is in my book, and I don't want to go off on too much of an aside. One time I actually looked in my refrigerator, and this was when we were living back in West Texas, and we had an on-grid farm, And I looked in my refrigerator. Everything in that refrigerator was a product that was made to be to store food without refrigeration. So I had jam, jelly, butter, ham, mustard, mayonnaise, even mayonnaise. Every single thing that was in my refrigerator existed to refrigerate items that were invented to not need refrigeration. They were all things that were ways of storing. Butter was a way of storing milk. Ketchup was a way of storing tomatoes. Mayonnaise was a way of storing eggs and oil. Every single thing that was in there. And that was another revelation to me. I was like, well, we're actually paying the refrigerator company and the electric company to put products in there that the originals of those products were made, so I don't need to do that.
It's so interesting. I've learned so much from people like you and my wife Colina about this type of thing. Like, I remember the first time I ever made my own yogurt, I was terrified to taste it. I'm like I just tasted like a half a teaspoon. A couple hours later, I'm like, I'm still alive. So then I tasted like I worked my way up. And the same thing when I made my own kimchi, and I was like terrified to eat it. And I actually threw it away. Like, I made this kimchi, and I'm like, it doesn't smell like the kimchi that I get at the Korean market. So
right.
I'm not eating this, and I threw it away. And same thing with sauerkraut, like all these things that I ferment, right? And
right.
My first or second job, I worked at a restaurant, Farrell's Ice Cream Parlor and Restaurant. And I had to go through a whole class on food safety and things like that. So I'm really conditioned to, like, if something's been sitting out for more than an hour and it's under 140 degrees, throw that thing away, right?
That's right. And you really have to, because it's the way that it's produced. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so like when Galena would make something like roast some roasted vegetables in olive oil, right? And then it sits in the, we went for a walk, or we forgot to put it in the refrigerator. I used to be like, I'm not eating that. But like, what is it? It's like vegetables roasted and all, like, there's nothing that could go bad, like eventually, yes, but like, I don't think a couple of hours is going to be a problem. So like, I've come a long way. Now I've made fermented onions and fermented all sorts of different things. I've made my own kimchi, yogurts, like an old hand, and it's really a freeing. It's freeing to realize that you go back in time and like this was like normal stuff, and nowadays like this whole refrigerator thing, it's crazy.
Well,
like when I worked at the restaurant, like. We didn't keep our ketchup in the refrigerator. Like, this is just regular ketchup, too. This is not any of that fancy old-fashioned ketchup. But, like, we didn't keep the ketchup in the refrigerator. But, like, so why do people keep the ketchup in the refrigerator today? Who wants to put cold ketchup on whatever they're eating, right?
Right.
But, like, so how did we get conditioned that everything needs to be, like, mustard just doesn't need to be refrigerated. Like,
no, it doesn't at all. And the thing is, it's this big lie. There's a huge lie that we've been taught from the very beginning, and that is that there is a natural world out there that is aligned against us. That its plan is to kill us, and there's these microorganisms out there that's all they want to do is kill us off the planet. Well, I happen to be an evolutionist, but that's counter-evolutionary. And so even if you don't believe in that, which I don't, I go, well, that doesn't even make any sense. And so, I meet people all the time, and they're like, well, what do you do with this so that it doesn't go bad? And one of the really interesting books that I read is Wild Fermentation by Felix Sandor Katz. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but this was a guy who actually he had AIDS, and he decided that he was going to use fermentation as a way to treat himself. And he went down this process you're talking about where, he started off fermenting a few things, and he's so extreme now. He just like gets some meat and sticks it in a jar and throws it on the counter. And like 3 months later, whatever's in there, he eats it. And that actually used to be, once you learn some of the science of why we have sausages and bacons and things like that, and then we have the lie of comparing the original to the fake one and judging the original by the fake.
Yeah.
And so, if you gave people real ketchup, which was a way of preserving tomatoes, and you gave it to them, they go, well, this doesn't taste like Heinz. No, that's not really true. Heinz doesn't taste like this. You're the one that's been imbibing in a fake, and so this is how it's supposed to taste. And if you still like Heinz after that, that's fine.
But it's a totally different thing.
Yeah, it's a completely different thing, and this product is designed not to go bad. It's designed to, and even if it grows mold on it, it's a beneficial penicillium mold, because bad mold can't grow on this medium. And so this is how our ancestors survived for thousands of years. Is even if they didn't know the science, they didn't know the science of yeast. They didn't even know that yeast was actually a living thing until the 1800s. But they knew that there was already on the grain, or on if they were making beer, or if they were making whatever they were making, there was already on that or in the air some little factory that turned this into what they wanted it to be. And with lactobacilli, it was the same thing. They realized that if they added salt or something that inhibited the bad bacteria, that the good bacteria would take over, and that good bacteria was good for them. It was good for the flora of their stomach and their linings and all those kind of things. And so we go down this process, like you said, which is actually the same process that our ancestors used to determine if any food, they didn't just start eating blueberries. They didn't. We're the only species really that, as children, test things with our mouths. We stick it in our mouth to see if it's any good. But they didn't just go around eating things to find out what was poison. It's like, Chet died, so we don't eat that. They actually start off with little teeny pieces. Maybe they lick it, and then they wait 30 minutes. Then they eat a little teeny piece of it, and then they wait 30 minutes or an hour. And then maybe 3 or 4 days later, they go, okay, this didn't have an effect on me, so this is an edible plant. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do with real food, is you start like that, and then you get to the point where I don't even think about any food unless I bought it at the store. I don't think about it going bad. If it may be unpalatable, but it's not something that's going to kill me if I eat it. Even meat, it's just not going to. And so if it's raised poorly and under bad conditions, then it can be dangerous and problematic. But other than that, I just don't worry about it. I mean, most of the time, the changes in the food are to the benefit of the eater.
Well, maybe we should be, when we crack open a jar of something we bought from the store, maybe we should taste it by the teaspoon. Yes, I'm still alive. An hour later, okay, I can eat a little bit more.
Well, yeah, and if you had a long enough timeline, you'd realize probably that was actually what was killing you.
Yeah. Well, so one of the funny things, so we want to talk a little bit about, you don't just make food for yourself, but I also know that you make food and you sell to other people, which I'm the proud recipient of a box of your Michael Bunker meats, right? So I'm really excited about that. And the reason that was funny, it was a funny story that got me interested into trying that. I was waiting. And as soon as you posted that you had another supply, I'm like, I'm in. Because you had once said that the number one video on YouTube for how to store bacon long term was a guy taking it and putting it in the refrigerator.
Right.
Which I'm like, I get it. I mean, I guess I thought at the time, why doesn't bacon have to be in the refrigerator? But then I remembered reading this book called The Wild, Jack London, right?
Right.
And he carried a pocket full of bacon, wrapped bacon and biscuits, for his whole trip. And it was frozen, but he was keeping it in his pocket so it would be warm enough to eat. So right. I'm thinking, that's weird. That's pretty risky, but I guess it's not. So tell us a little bit about the stuff that you sell, the stuff that you make, and why it's so great.
Yeah, the stuff that we make is it's actually cured. Now, the word cure has been co-opted by the industrial food system to mean it's made to taste a certain way, so it's flavored. So when you buy bacon at the store, even when you buy the good bacon, when you go buy the thick Wright's bacon or whatever it is, that is not a truly cured product. It's actually a flavored product, and they use liquid smoke. Most of those are cured. I'm using air quotes, within a day or two. It's just a flavored product, and it really isn't. it isn't shelf stable. It has to be refrigerated because there's no real curing of the meat. Curing actually means that from the original product, another product has been made that is shelf stable and does not go bad. And the curing of bacon and other meats was generally affected by the adding of salts and things like that in a way and manner without refrigeration that drove out a good portion of the moisture and infiltrated the meat to the point where that meat actually became something different, and it became something that is healthy, and at the same time it's not a viable food for bad bacteria. The bad bacteria can't survive. And so, when the Puritans and Pilgrims came over here, they had barrels full of salted bacon, and that bacon was basically dried enough that nothing could grow in it that was bad. Lactobacilli could grow, and that changed the product into something that was a little bit more flavorful. And then whenever they were ready for some bacon, they would cut off a hunk. They would soak it in water for a couple of hours, maybe a day or two, to get rid of a lot of the salty taste. And then they sliced it thin and they fried it up. Or they could actually eat it fresh because there was nothing bad in it that could make them sick. And so this is the way that meats. And in Northern Europe, a lot of things like sausages became very, very popular because it was a way to store your scrap meats for long periods of time, hanging. And Galena will know this. When you go into Eastern Europe, you go into a shop, they have meat hanging right there at room temperature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
it's common. It's completely common. And so, and that always freaked me out before I got into this lifestyle, because I would you'd see that, and it actually still looked like a chicken. If you watch The Godfather, they're going down, he's looking at the tomatoes or the oranges, and there's like animals hanging in the background, and it's like the summer, and it didn't make any sense to me until I started studying it, and that's because that meat had been properly preserved or stored. And you could go down to the butcher and you can get a hunk of ham, or you could get a sausage or any type of cured meat. It was perfectly healthy. Not only that, but it was actually a benefit to the health. And we're finding out now that like in Russia, the serfs actually ate what we would consider today to be an artisanal meal, and the rich landowners ate garbage. Which is true today too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny, when I first went to Russia, if you went to a store like a supermarket, their chickens were there with the feathers.
Right.
And like in our stores, we didn't have the feathers, so I was like, this is so weird that they have the feathers on, But, it's, and in Spain, like if you go to a bar, there's usually giant ham hanging over you as you're drinking your drinks, and people are smoking in there, like actual cigarettes, and it's going up and around, and it's fine. It just becomes a part of the flavor profile.
Yeah, it's the tapas culture.
Yeah.
Is actually one of the healthiest cultures in the world, and a lot of that is an almost constant cheeses and sausages and smoked meats.
Well, it was just fun to go to Bulgaria and see. One of our friends owns a really big gym, and you go into the gym and you look up and there's like sausages hanging in the rafters.
Right.
And her father has like, here's the clothesline, and like at the end of the clothesline there's all my sausages.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We've got a root cellar and I've got so much meat hanging in there. It's kind of funny, but based on the way that we lived, like you said, if it was out for an hour or so, you would just throw it away. And you lived with this terror of the food attack that was being made upon you constantly, and it's so backwards. It's so backwards to the truth. But with our meat products, it really started with that. It was when we very first moved out here, we would harvest an animal or a pig or a cow, and we would take it to the butcher and would have a lot of that done, and then we would get it back in bacon and all of these type of things. And it was better than what we were buying at the store, but that question is always in the back of our mind: how would we do this? And so when we started actually doing them ourselves, and actually taking responsibility for the quality of our food and that type of thing. I would try to explain to people, and this is why we sell some of our product. We never want to get into the position where it's a dollar economy thing for us, where that's what we're doing to survive. So maybe we stop growing our gardens so we could do more meat products. That's never going to happen. So what we do is we make enough for ourselves, and then we sell any that we have that's over that. But when we first started doing our meat products, I would explain to people, well, no, this doesn't go bad. And it's like explaining something in a language somebody doesn't understand. And so, and then you have to explain the taste. Okay, when you very first try this bacon, Roland, it may seem salty, but that's people don't realize that how something tastes to them quite often has to do with what minerals their body needs. If you don't need salt, something will taste saltier to you than, and what our ancestors did, they adjusted that by soaking it in water or cleaning it off or whatever. What they didn't do is try to expect some big Smithfield factory to normalize taste so that everybody got the same thing. We raise cattle, and cattle know when they need a particular mineral, and you'll see them, they'll lick on a mineral block or they'll lick on a rock. Mm-hmm. Or something like that. They know when they need salt, and they know when they're deficient in it. And humans used to be that way. So we added salt when our body required it. And then all of this got kind of normalized or systematized by the food system. And so that, of course, that has its own problems with our health and that sort of thing too. And so, a lot of it was just education, telling people, okay, you're not to take my bacon and go, this is not like the stuff I bought at the store. My bacon is what bacon is. This is what it was when it came over to America. This is what bacon. And what you're tasting is an anomaly in time that you might compare that to this. But that's the hardest part to get through to people, is that recovering your health, recovering your sanity is not about trying to rebuild what you already have just a different way. It's actually adopting, our Americans have a very narrow taste profile. We've been forced into a salt or sugar, savory or sweet, and that's it. And you yo-yo back and forth between those two things. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Eastern Europe and in Russia and other places, they have a taste profile that's much broader. Mm-hmm. And so sours and bitters and things like that are part of a enjoyable food experience. And that's what we're trying to educate people on now, is that to recover your health and recover your freedom, you need to also recover what you desire. Mm-hmm. The right desires, and that involves food and living and a lot of other things.
And that's like a recalibration that everyone has to go through. And it would be hard to go through it if someone else is making all your food for you, because that's what you get. It's like, here's a guest just plopped in my belly. Who is it? Instead of you finding your way. And it is kind of like a hero's journey thing. Like, you have to go through it and find your way and earn your return.
Exactly right. That's exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm really excited to try, especially the bacon, because I've had real cured sausage before, courtesy of Yvonne, Galena's father, but I've never had truly
real bacon.
Real bacon.
Yeah.
They need a new name for the new stuff. Because it's tasty. Because it's tasty too, but it's just not going to be the same. And I want
manufactured. Industrial age bacon.
Industrial, yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it's interesting whenever my parents go on a trip and they bring something because they found a farmer or somebody who makes something. My dad will say, "I got some real," and then he'll say what it is. Like, I got some real cheese curd, or I got some real butter, or I got, like, he'll introduce it as like, I got some real stuff, and I'm saving it because I only go home once or twice a year. I'm saving it for you. So like the last time he was saving some sheep cheese for me, it's like, I'm saving it for you, and it's precious to him because it's real. Yeah. But he grew up on a farm, so he's able to, now in his mid-60s, he still remembers. So he has a radar. He has a real food radar. Those people who have never tasted those foods have no radar. So you have to repopulate the radar.
Well, the last time I was there, he says, "Do you want some real beer?" And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Real beer. Hasn't been processed or anything like that. It's like real beer, like the guy made it, real." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course."
Yeah.
So then he's gone for like an hour. I'm like, "Where did he go?" She goes, Galena says, "Well, he went to get the real beer." I'm like,
yeah.
Okay. He went to the guy's place,
yeah.
With his own bottle, and said, "Can you fill up this bottle of beer?" So I could take it back to my son-in-law. He's never had real beer before. And he comes back, and it was amazing. It was good. But, it was like a special thing, and he was so excited to introduce me to this real product. So, yeah. It's awesome.
It's like, the Belgian style, natural beers, natural ales. I start people on those sometimes, and I'll say, okay, just taste this. It's got a sourness to it because it's actually naturally fermented with natural yeast and et cetera. And then, if somebody that's all they've been drinking is Coors Light, and you give them something that actually has real flavor, they think that that's bad because they don't know, they have, and I hate to use the term, but they have retarded taste buds. And, but there's, you're talking about Galena's father saying, I got the real stuff, and it's like there's almost like this club that we're in now, and it really is, because I look at people when they'll try my stuff, and I look at them, and when their eyes go wide open, and you can tell this is like a flavor explosion that they haven't experienced, and they love it. We're like in the same club now. We know, you don't have to say anything, and you look at each other, and you're like, yep. Yeah. So when I talk to people, wine is one of those things that's really been industrialized beyond its ability to be recognized anymore as one of the original. And I love industrial modern wine. I love the taste of it and all that kind of stuff. But it is not what it was. And there's a documentary series on, I think it's on Netflix, called The Somm, SOMM. Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes through the master sommelier's test and all that. But in the second one, there's a lady who started a vineyard in Italy or someplace, I don't remember, France, and she started doing natural wines, actually naturally fermented wines with no adjuncts, no added chemicals. And that's what I've kind of really gotten into lately, is actually making an all natural, and it's medicine. I mean, this is what they actually. It's even in the Bible, mm-hmm. Take a little wine for your stomach. It's like the real thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's been something that's been real representative of our whole journey.
Yeah. Wow.
Is piece by piece, what we're putting back together this puzzle,
Yeah, I guess modern Bibles should put a little note in there. Please, you take a little sip of ancient wine, or like traditionally produced wine.
Welch's grape juice.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the bacon. I'm also, next time I'm going to pounce on it next time I see it, because I missed your window of garlic. I know you have some special garlic that you grow.
Right.
And I'm really excited to try that, because I hear it tastes amazing, but it's also got some special health qualities compared to store-bought.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's fantastic garlic. It's a very high allicin count, which is what is the healthy benefit of garlic. Mm-hmm. And it's something that's just been kind of almost indigenized here through the years of us growing it. And we've just discovered that this could be a very, very special place for growing this type of garlic. Oh. And so it's been really, really good. And the people that we've created a lot of addicts. You'll see them online, the people that like the bunker garlic. Unhappily, this year, because of the almost no rain this winter, we're not going to have a crop for sale this year. Mm-hmm. We're growing enough to be able to plant again next year, but we aren't going to have enough to sell. But we'll still have it, Lord willing, next year available. And so we have enough for seed.
Great. Very good. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your books. I know that you write fiction and nonfiction, but I was looking a little bit, and Surviving Off-Grid seems like the kind of book that our listeners could really learn from.
That book has been around. I think we published that in 2011. It was a massive bestseller when it first came out. It still sells pretty well. And it's really the philosophy that I've talked about on this program, the whole philosophy of what has happened to us, and how we got here, and why people might want to consider making some changes, and also some how-to as far as mentally making those changes. And so that book was my first real publishing experience. And then a bunch of people started telling me, you talk about these scenarios of what could happen in surviving off-grid, why we might need to live this way, but I'm having trouble getting my mind around how that could happen in a modern era. So I wrote a book as a fiction book. It was my first fiction book called The Last Pilgrims. And basically it's a post-apocalyptic book that happens 25 years after an apocalyptic event that takes out the grid, that takes it out permanently. And basically the world has reverted back to almost 500 years ago, and what that would be like. And so in the book, in a fiction setting, I am able to go through and say, okay, this is how they're getting their water, this is how they're making their food, this is how they're preserving their food, and put some real world experiences in that book. And that book's called The Last Program. Then I've got a lot of other, like my Amish sci-fi books, like Brother Frankenstein, Pennsylvania. He sold the film option to the book Pennsylvania.
Awesome.
Hopefully making it into a movie. And so there's a lot of other good stuff to read if they like those.
Wow.
So good. And we're going to link all of those in the show notes, plus some of your most standout YouTube videos, so that people can get to them easy.
What is the best way our readers can find you online, learn more about you, and be ready to pounce on your limited supply of meat and hopefully garlic in the future? Right.
Well, now the absolute best way, as you probably know, is on Facebook, just because I'm there pretty often. And you just find me at facebook.com/offgrid, and that'll be me. And just follow me there, and and I'm there. I make a lot of jokes. There's a lot of comedy attempts, but there's also, yeah, and there's a lot of irony that goes on there. But if you want to find out about when I have products for sale, I do have a website, michaelbunker.com, but I want to just warn everybody up front that we are just now building that site. It is available. It is there. You can go check out michaelbunker.com. But nothing really works yet because we're still working out a lot of the kinks on the new site. There's a lot of there's a free blog there. You can go back a couple of years and a lot of that stuff. But a lot of the things, if you try to sign up for things other than my email list, it should work. A lot of the links don't work yet because we're still putting it together. Hopefully in the next month, that site will be fully live.
Great. That was awesome. We'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes. And you're going to be able to, if you're listening, well, obviously people are listening now, it'll be at eatmovelive52.com/Michael Bunker you can find the show notes. And Michael, it was great talking to you. I've learned even more, and I'm just really jazzed that you came on the show.
Oh man, it's been fun. It's fun for me to be able to talk about something other than selling books sometimes.
I would love to have you on again. I feel like there's so much we can talk about, including Russian literature, which I don't know how our listeners are going to feel about.
Right.
But we have so many common things. I feel like somewhere in our ancestry and what we're interested in. But I am so excited to meet you and to have a real life. I mean, it's like we need role models for this time, and I'm very happy to put you up there on my role model. The wall of role models.
Well, I appreciate that very much. It's very kind, and it's been fun. And anytime you guys want me on, just let me know. And we could do, maybe do a show on a particular type of fermentation, or
I would love that.
Cheese, or any of my loves.
Do you accept visitors in Texas?
We do. I do warn people that it is probably a little bit rougher than you're imagining. In other words, we're a lot of times people have farms and they'll have visitors, and it's really it is like kind of living the regular life, only there's animals. Ours is not.
Dude ranch.
Yeah, ours is not a dude ranch, and it is not fancy. we are building infrastructure to someday hopefully have some type of ecotourism where people can, and not like a living history farm, but where people can actually come see a working pre-industrial farm and taste the food and maybe work themselves.
Maybe learn how to work, because that's what I was saying. If I would love to work or ferment or do something kind of like you guys can probably use some free labor or some people who would be happy to pay to do labor for you, and learn how to dig through a rock or cut cabbage or whatever it is that they can do. But I would be thrilled to do that when the snakes are not in Texas. If you can just let us know, I'll be very happy to come.
We will help you do that. We'll also help you overcome your fear and endow you with a love for snakes.
Oh, thank you. I think that Roland would pay handsomely to anyone who can help me overcome the fear of snakes that makes me climb on top of him and create a very uncomfortable experience every time.
I'm just the man for the job. So I'll be glad to talk to you about it. And it's like anything else. It's a mental block we can get through.
Yeah, it goes back to like our first.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I
think our people all had a bad experience historically with a certain snake.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael.
All right, y'all. Thank you.
Bye. If you like today's show and want more episodes like it, you can help us by rating and reviewing the show wherever you subscribe. That means iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, or in the podcast app on your phone. Do you know somebody who can benefit from today's episode? Share it right now from the show notes, which you can always find at eatmovelive52.com/notes. And that funk that's playing behind me, it's called Proto-Funk by Kevin MacLeod. Thanks, and talk to you soon.